Hey guys, I'm Erin,
I'm Mo.
and this is Couch Astrology. So, we have now talked about the sun, the moon, the rising sign, and last month we talked about Mercury, which was our first relational planet. So, that was fun because we got to finally step out of the I
Hmm.
and talk about more we. So, Mercury, obviously, we talked about that planet doing that in more of an intellectual and communicative way. And now this week we'll talk about Venus, which has a much different relational component to it. It's more intimate. A lot of people think of Venus as being the planet of love, sex, desire, which it is all of those things. But I do also like to think of Venus as being involved in anything, any relationship where the heart is involved.
Hmm.
So whether that be friendships, family dynamics, romantic partnerships, Venus is broad. It is all the things that you probably know about it, but it is also more. So I'm
Right.
excited to talk about that more today.
Yeah. So we can start with kind of the basics with Venus. It can move relatively quickly. The average time it spends in each sign is about 23 days to 2 months. So it varies a little more. And it's also like Mercury can only be, well, Mercury is only one sign away, but Venus
Yeah.
can only be 2 signs away from your sun sign. So 2 signs before or 2 signs after your sun sign. Um, and then as far as the appearance of Venus, it has a white, twinkly appearance, kind of like Jupiter, right?
Yeah.
So I know we've talked about when you look at the sun or when you look at the moon and kind of that first impression of what you get, and Venus gives that beautiful, soft, magnetic, and
Yeah.
it's also isn't it like the brightest?
Yeah. So and I don't know, I think it's fun to like talk about what we can see. So like when Venus is visible, when we look up at the sky, it looks like the brightest star in the sky.
Outside of the sun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. But this is like I that and Jupiter and being like the two benefic planets, so like the do-gooders, which is not always ultimately true, but this is like it's like a good starting point for understanding the two planets. But Venus appears to be like white and twinkly, which really parallels a lot of the themes of Venus, which is like
Mm-hmm.
appearance and this like kind of like royal
Mm-hmm.
feeling, like presenting yourself in a nice way. So it's just like another fun fact
Yeah.
that I like to draw in.
Yeah.
Um, so going into rulership of Venus, we have Taurus and Libra who rule Venus. We have Pisces exalted, Scorpio and Aries in detriment, and then we have Virgo in fall. So, I mean, did you want to talk about a little bit about like the Taurus and Libra?
Yeah. So of course I'm a little bit excited to be on Venus because now I get to talk about Libra a little bit and Taurus. So um with Taurus, it's Taurus and Libra have like kind of two sides of the same coin with Venus, would you say? Would you agree? Or Taurus has more of the like relationship to nature, the possessions, the tangible side of Venus, like that sort of sensuality. And then with a lot of like Taurus placements, the Venusian energy can kind of channel through careers in finance, agriculture, engineering, architecture. All of those can sort of have that like strong Taurian energy. Um, and then with Libra, it has that sort of Venusian side of like the relationship that you have with others, and sort of like the more intangible and like not necessarily physical side of Venus, but partnership, and social navigation, maybe.
Yeah, I think okay. I think Taurus and Libra both have such an aesthetic component to them.
Right.
Like they that is too, and this is like part of their. I don't even like to use the word stereotype when it's true,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like we see it come up as a theme so often. But something that people may know commonly about Taurus and Libra is that they are like inclined to the aesthetic,
Mm-hmm.
and where Libra I feel like does that more in appearance of self,
Mm-hmm.
even like they, and maybe not even always, right? But Libra really values like a good looking person.
Mm-hmm.
And not that we, maybe everybody doesn't, but they are inclined to like
Appreciate
goods,
it.
appreciate it and like be able to recognize when something is like put together well. And then when I think of Taurus, I think, I don't know, I go more towards like the home even because Taurus
Mm-hmm.
obviously is all about like creature comforts. Um,
The Earth side of it. Yeah.
yeah, is like really good at putting this vision together. But even like the Tauruses, I know, and I guess speaking on like even like some mainly some of my like women friends, um, like they put themselves together really nicely
Mhm.
too. But I think mainly is like the value core of
Mhm.
like appreciating things being put together and presented a certain
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
So I think those are both two huge themes for those
Totally.
sides. Yeah.
And even aside from the like physical aesthetics, I think the side that Libra starts to like maybe represent a little bit more is that the the beauty, like, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, but kind of like the beautiful thinking of like there's that poetic aspect, or I don't know, that sort of like inclination to like appreciating art, which Taurus does too, and that is Venusian in general, but it's more so it can be like a little bit more abstract and like the beautiful, because Libra bringing in the air component can have sort of the
More of like a
intellectual.
dynamic sense
Yeah,
to it.
yeah,
Yeah, whereas I do feel like Taurus being an earth sign is like very put together. Whereas I don't really think of Libras necessarily, doesn't mean this can't be true for Libras, as like being put together.
totally, yeah.
Like they are more, I don't even know if I would say like eccentric, but leaning towards, like I said, like this sense of being more dynamic. Whereas Taurus is more grounded and like looking and presenting a certain
Right,
way
right, I
that
agree,
feels
yeah.
more, I don't know, like clean,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
And it's funny because they are two very different signs, right? Like I would not necessarily place them next to each other in terms of like being similar all around, but this part of them is like the string,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
and it exists
totally.
in two different ways, but it is like just the similarity between them two. And then obviously we have like, we had talked about this with, I believe, like the sun and the moon, but like the same way that we talked about the appearance of the planet in the sky is also when we come into like Taurus and Libra talking about like the seasons and what does it look like when we are in the, rulership season of a planet. And
Mhm.
so Venus specifically being ruled by themes of like beauty and color and all of those things. We have Taurus season, which is like beginning of the spring. And so
Mhm.
we have all of these different colors that are blooming and flowers. It is the time where,
We're settling in, like it's almost like obviously there's Aries spring, but then it's like you get past that immediate jump start and now
yeah,
you're settling into that sort of like,
yeah,
okay, we're not.
things are in full bloom now. Like it's,
Right,
and I
right.
think that that's the difference because I thought about that earlier. It's like, okay, there's Aries is spring and we have Aries here like in detriment, but there's a difference, right? Is like there's a difference between creeping upon something and then also being in like the peak
Because there's still
of a
transition from
season.
Aries season,
Yeah.
from the dead to life,
Yeah.
where with Taurus season, it's just like,
Is like
okay, we're
everything has come
here.
up.
Yeah.
Yes. And then you have Libra season, which is same but different, which
Hmm.
it is a great representation of the two signs together, like we were just talking about. But Libra being like that point of fall where all of the leaves have changed.
Hmm.
And so it's like the most expressive part of these two seasons, which is, and it represents exactly what Venus is, which another word to symbolize Venus would be like expression,
Right,
right?
right.
Um, Especially
Totally.
when it comes to like expression of like style and like something visual,
Hmm. Hmm.
something sensory, I guess I should say.
Right.
Um,
And then there's Pisces exalted,
mhm,
which it's interesting because Pisces, I think, does have a good integration of the things we just touched on with Taurus and Libra. Um, but I think Pisces can filter those experiences based on how they feel. And that's a little bit the sort of extra mile that goes beyond what Taurus and Libra do. Pisces can feel the vibes and navigate based on that. And there's that Piscean energy that like naturally wants to desire, or naturally desires to express things like artistically and be forward with their
mhm.
emotions and empathize. So
I just
and
feel like Pisces has like no problem being like all in and cheesy, but in a way that they can like keep some kind of hold on themselves. You know what I
right,
mean?
right.
Like they're able to like be in the moment as it is and just like totally dive into it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously they're like extremely artistically inclined. That is just like a part of whether or not that be true for like any Pisces that may listen to this. That is a core theme of Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that be like emotionally expressive, a lot of the time is like art, I don't even know what the word would be, like by hand, you know,
Art.
art by hand, but then also like musical art and
Mhm.
things like that,
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that
And
is
then
very true.
another aspect of it is how Pisces rules the sort of domain of like the past and culture.
Mm.
And when you look in, society, there's a huge social value placed on valuing art and admiring art and culture. And I think that kind of shows like the exaltation of Pisces and Venus and how um, that reflects on what we value, which is where Venus starts to
Yeah.
assign those things to. So,
Yeah. And then obviously another, like the big blanket over Pisces is, it just cracked me up. The big blanket over Pisces is this like ability to be dreamy,
mm-hmm.
and that can
The
sound so,
fantasy and
yes, but
yeah.
it is so true, is that this, and this appeals to like Venus's desire for beauty and pleasure, as Pisces can go all the way in on these kinds of experiences, whereas I feel like with signs like, and I'll just draw on for a second, like the Virgo being in fall,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which I guess would be opposite of this. So yeah, this being exalted and then Virgo being in fall, like Virgo would struggle more with that. Virgo is not going to be so dreamy. These aren't going to be, even though Virgo is also very artistically inclined, the nature is different. And we'll talk about that
There's
in
a
a
method to
second.
the madness where
Yeah.
Pisces kind of like fall in.
Yeah.
And they give that more like that Disney fairy tale, like
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
it's achievable. She's
100%. I know.
right
She's
now.
not going to stop.
But yeah.
um, yeah. Okay. So then, just so that we cover all the bases, we also have Scorpio and
Aries.
Aries in detriment. And and that's interesting, right? Like we mentioned Aries like in the seasons is the start of spring, and but we also know from like the sun episode that Aries is exalted in the
Right.
sun. Aries as a sign, it's the first sign in the zodiac. It is centers in self, right? And not in a negative way, but
Mm-hmm.
that is the that is the purpose of Aries,
Yeah.
right? Is to achieve one's goal.
Mm-hmm.
And to be in that
To
space.
be
And so,
seen and
yeah,
right.
and it doesn't necessarily like, it is not, I want to emphasize, it's not to good or bad in any capacity. Like that's really not what astrology is, but it's like, what is Venus's goal? And so Aries doesn't necessarily fit into Venus's goal, which would put it into detriment. We have Scorpio, which can tend to fall into obsession.
And
And
being self-consumed too, like the
yes,
self-sacrifice and wanting to
yeah,
put others maybe on a pedestal in a way or
it's funny because I wouldn't even say Scorpio is self-sacrificing necessarily. They really can be. It's so difficult. I think of
yeah, it
Pisces as
varies.
self-sacrifice, but Scorpio Scorpio really yearns for like power and doesn't really mean power over a person. That's not really how Venus and Scorpio falls in love. Like
Mhm.
they are very other focused, I
Mhm.
think, when they're in
Mhm.
that space. But like the themes of how Scorpio and Venus shows up is not really conducive to Venus's goal.
Mhm.
And I was also reading something, well, we were reading something before this, which I really liked. But it was like saying there's something about detriment Venus people that just can't conform to any social role that they feel they may be expected to play, which is big with Scorpio and Aries, right? Is like those two signs is like they don't really want to fall into line with some kind of like social um, standard
Mhm.
in partnership. But also, it said, more to do. What did it say? This can often have to do with a detriment Venus's fear. So either Scorpio Venus or Aries Venus fear of relationship incompetence. And I was started thinking about people, and I was like, that makes sense to
Yeah.
me. You know,
I think another interesting point as you were just talking is like screaming out to me is Aries being a fire cardinal and Scorpio being a fixed water,
mhm.
that
Yeah.
they're both not like in different ways, but that like Venus's goals and energy, like having that cardinal fire there is just like not necessarily vibing with Venus because it's go go go.
Mhm.
What am I doing?
Yeah.
And then there's that fixed water that's like I'm feeling so much, but it's hard for me to um
But still very like, I don't know, when you think of the fix, I think of the sense of like like the stern nature, which Scorpio and Venus definitely
Feeling
has.
so much, but not really necessarily being able to like adapt in that way
Well,
that
yeah,
Pisces being a water can adapt with those
Pisces
emotions.
literally, and that's how Pisces fits and is exalted in that space, is like Pisces doesn't feel like a fool when they fall all the way
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
whereas Scorpio is like,
I'm
I'm
losing a little
not.
control here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's not, again, it's not negative, right? It's
yeah.
just like that fixed nature is very much so like,
Not
we're not going
comfortable.
to go there. Like there's a dynamic happening here that could go wrong, and that
Yeah.
scares me.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it is a sense of like needing that control, and that just doesn't really work with Venus, right? Like Venus kind of wants you to fall all the way in, and like appreciate it for the experience. Like
Right.
Venus is so much of an experience,
Mhm.
and we'll get into a
Mhm.
lot of those themes, but I think that that's very true.
Yep.
Um, and then the last one, and we kind of touched on it, was the Virgo being in
Right.
fall, which, that feels. I had said this to her earlier, but I'm like, I couldn't find the words for it. I hadn't found the words for it yet, but I'm like, that just feels more right than any of these other things.
Especially
Like Virgo,
contrasting with Pisces
yeah,
of like you again saying how like Pisces can just fall and be in the experience, and Virgo's rational
yeah.
and methodical and
Cautious is a big
cautious
thing for
and
Virgo.
maybe a little guarded,
Yeah.
for in their own sense, like for good reason, but that's not what Venus is asking of you.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. Like I had mentioned that Virgo, and this is something I love about the Virgo Pisces dynamic, just as like a side note, is that they both are like extremely artistically
Mm-hmm.
inclined. And I always like to point that out to people, um, is that Virgo is not just so, you think of an earth sign and you almost detach them from the arts
Right,
in a
right,
sense,
right.
and it's just very not true.
Because they're so connected with the nature of things
Yeah.
and the tangible things and
Yeah, exactly. And at Virgo, especially, anyways, we talked about it with Mercury,
yeah,
but
yeah.
being the writers and so on and so forth. So it's not that Virgo lacks a lot of these qualities of Venus. However, Virgo is the perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
I think of like my dad, who's been working on his book since I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and it's never done. It
Mm-hmm.
always needs revision, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's also common for writers, um, but it is very Virgo-esque,
Mm-hmm.
and that, again, that does
The
not function.
perfectionism.
Yeah, that doesn't function well in Venus, right? It's like, again, there's so much about the experience, and with the perfectionism of a Virgo, and the tendency towards um, what can be like criticism, whether
Yeah.
if it's of oneself or of the other person.
Mm-hmm.
That's also a common theme. That's not necessarily going to work towards Venus's goal.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And then general indications.
Yeah, just you could just start reading some.
Alrighty, so for the general indications, we have love, obviously, affection, possessions and possessiveness, how and what we love, sensory perception, especially sound, and that's because Venus rules the throat and the ears, aesthetics, sensuality, pleasure, your taste in things, social intelligence,
Reciprocity.
reciprocity, personal presence and best features, how others receive us, finances, relationship, negotiations, refinement, um, social survival, and kind of how we can make life easier, more harmonious for everyone involved, a shared responsibility, language, voice, sound, alliances, diplomacy, and the love languages. And then Venus, like I said before, does rule the ears, throat, tongue, ovaries, and the pituitary gland.
Yeah, so just getting into some of these like indications, um, which, and there are more, which we'll read some more in a second. But I actually love when there's bunches of um, like significations and things like that. Hearing them all together, even though some of them can feel so like far away
Mm-hmm.
from the other, it's like somehow when I hear them all in a bunch, it's kind of one of, I always start there actually,
Starts to
like,
paint a full picture.
yeah, like whenever I'm like diving into something, I always go into like the significations first. I just think it gives me like a good broad idea of what we're talking about. um So yeah, I mean, we talked about some of these things when we opened up the episode, is like we know that Venus is often like love and affection, how and what we love. That's like a big one. That
Mm-hmm.
was my first, I think, way of describing Venus to myself and to others, and still holds true,
Yeah.
right? But there's something um, there's something bigger here. Like you talked about social intelligence and like social survival, and so it's like, what does that look like with Venus, right? And a lot of that is like, how am I, like that sense of social survival and like social interaction of like, how do I show up
Right.
in a way that is going to put me in the place that I need to
Yeah,
be,
how are
you
other
know?
people going to react or like see me, and what does that do for me? Is that serving me? Is it,
Yeah,
and even more so, a more like uh generic view of it is like, how can I be liked, in a way, at the social
for sure.
survival of,
Yeah,
you
like
know,
it is just almost like a part of human nature to like, okay, the the way that I present myself, it often has to do with like the cultures that we are around and X, Y, and Z. There are so many factors to this part, right? But at
mm-hmm,
the core of it is very much so, like, where do I want to fit in?
mm-hmm,
What is my social goal that I'm
mm-hmm,
trying to achieve? So yeah, I think that looks at Venus in like a wider sense. In like a wider sense for
right.
sure. Um, okay. So a few more significations were, and these are from Valens, um, is desire, love, mother, nurse, marriages, changes for the good, music making, sweet singing, beauty of form, those who are fond of cleanliness and play, giving, receiving, laughter, rejoicing, order, aquatic animals, royal women or relatives, remarkable reputation, especially when Venus placement cooperates, face, lips, nose, the nourishing of another who is capable of receiving.
Mm.
And like, I love these. Also, I will always use Valens significations, and I can thank Chris Brennan for like putting me onto that. But these are so, I feel like some of them sound complex, but um, we see like the theme of mother and nursing and things like that here, which obviously are themes of that we heard through the moon and can absolutely still remain true.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're looking, and this is what Chris Brennan talks about this actually, and he does a good job of putting it into words. But essentially, we look at two like traditionally uh, two planets that maybe exhibit more like traditionally womanly traits.
Feminine, yeah,
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 and and that's the Moon and
yeah.
Venus. So you see both sides. You're gonna see commonalities, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just like a tale of the times. Let's just say that, and the culture and whatnot. However, a lot of it too, I think, with Venus is like, okay, what was like we think of Moon as like relationship with mother and so on and so forth, but Venus is also like, how are we maybe like affected by who was nursing us at the time and what did we get from our mothers or caretakers and things like that. So there's like
And
interesting
kind of that
parallels
sort of,
there.
I know, what was it? Yeah, like the giving and the laughter and the cleanliness and play. It's
Mm,
almost like the roles or um,
like the order of
traits
that.
that the mother or woman figure of like a home takes, and how
Yeah.
that is received. And if you think about your mom, or think about like women in your family, and like that sort of culture of like coming together and like laughing and sharing
Do you
and
feel
readying things and
I do think that's true for like when we look at the themes of Venus, but then it's like, okay, if we brought the sign in, how would you feel about that correlation? Like I'm asking honestly, do you think the themes of that in relation to Sagittarius Venus would relate to like how you were nurtured as a child?
yeah,
Okay.
which
Cuz
is weird. Do you feel
yeah.
that way? Because
Um
I don't think I've thought about it in that lens before. And
because that would be how it would obviously affect us in our own chart, is like
well,
if I bring the sign into it, like these are the themes of Venus individual, like as a whole, and so it's like what happens when I put it into my chart, like plug it in, right? And it's
mm-hmm,
like, okay, looking at my life with Cancer placements in Venus, or with, with Cancer and Venus. I'm like honestly
I know,
actively thinking
me
about
too.
it. And I don't, maybe in some capacity,
Well,
maybe
let
in
me
some
tell you what
capacity.
came to mind for me and see if that rings anything for you, because it's not necessarily exactly what you'd expect. But if I'm being really literal about it, because I can see the sort of um, dynamic just in general of like maybe how I the the nurturing that I got with the Sag Venus, but there's also when I think about like the giving and the joyful laughter and sort of things, I think about my aunt who's a Sag, and she is the first person I would think of when it comes to those like womanly, feminine relationships in my
Hmm.
family, and just that sort of like energy of a lot of humor and um, a lot of conversation. Like she just embodies that sort of thing for me when I think
Yeah.
about the woman in my family in general. So I don't
Yeah.
know if that's necessarily exactly touching on like the motherly nurturing sort of thing, but as far as the roles,
Well,
it
I think it's
feels
like close caretakers, right? So if like that person was close to you in like formative years, then I
right.
think that would play a part. Because I'm thinking about my mom, but she was that person, and she was a Cancer moon, and I do think that she was more nurturing, like that she played a nurturing role during
Mhm.
those years,
Mhm.
and very much so was caretaker like. So I could see that being relevant, but
Mhm.
that just I asked that question just because you brought that up, and I had to frame it that way. So it was interesting, um, but anyways, more to the like significations. I love. Let's see. Okay, those who are fond of cleanliness and play. I love that. Um, Giving and receiving, which goes into like the nourishing of another who is capable of receiving. I love that.
I really
Um,
like that.
yeah, the giving of another who is capable of receiving, because like in I know you talk about this often, but it's like that is a good theme of Venus, is that like the giving and the taking,
Mhm.
right? Like Venus doesn't want to be in this alone. Venus wants to like they want to have balance,
Yeah,
right?
I want you. It's like as much as I want to be loved in return, but I also want you to accept my love.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to accept it, because it's like, are you capable of receiving it? Can
Hmm.
you appreciate what I'm willing to do for you?
Yeah.
Does that scare you? Are you willing to allow me to take care of you or nourish
Yeah.
you in that way, I
And that
guess?
makes sense, because that is where we come together and rejoice in partnership with
Mhm.
people,
Mhm.
is when there's this sense of like freedom and reciprocity and
Mhm.
all of these things. It's like that is when we feel that true sense of like um togetherness.
Mhm.
But I also, a theme of Venus that I love is like the order. And it's not written on here, but like another word I would use is like the readying,
Mhm.
And so Venus is very much so. Um, we talk a lot about beauty and appearance and things like that, but then think of like the ritual of putting it all together. So like for me, like sitting and doing my makeup and doing my hair and putting myself together and making myself presentable, like that is one small example of like how this can show up with Venus, but such an important one.
And on that aspect of like the ritual for yourself and what it does for you throughout the process, it's also something that is such like a, I think for most girls, like a part of girlhood,
Mhm.
and doing that with women and with girls, or your mom doing that, your hair or
Yeah.
whatever, and that sort of that transition of like girl to woman and like what it
Yeah.
means to kind of take care of your appearance and
Yeah.
want to present yourself as a woman,
Yeah.
I
But
think
it's
that's
also, yeah, and I okay, so because I don't like to get personally into
yeah.
too much of like the roles, but I do love that because it's true. But then I also think of like women who maybe don't take on so much of that like type of readying,
Uh-huh.
you know, and then men, right? And and it just, because we all fall into this process in some capacity, right?
Totally.
Like readying myself to be adorned is like, what does that look like for me? And kind of what we talked about earlier is like, what is my goal, right? What group am I trying to fit into? What
Mhm.
partner am I trying to attract? And so all of those factors are going to determine how I ritualize this like readying process. Um, but just like really the ritual of anything, right? Like when I think of Venus too, and especially like the art aspect of it, I think I can even get like the this like preparing myself into like a state of like meditation, and that being like
Right.
a form of art and
Mhm.
things like that. I really like that.
Mhm.
Um, but another thing that it says on here is like the royalty, royal women are relatives. And another theme, I'm pretty sure this is like a valence signification, is like purple dyeing,
Mm,
like to dye
yeah,
things
yeah.
purple. And to dye things purple was like the most rare and costly.
Regal, yeah.
Yeah, it was like cost the most amount of money, and it was essentially,
Reserved.
it was reserved for people of royalty. Yeah, so there's like it, all of these things like paint the picture of what Venus is, right? um I'm trying to think. There were like, okay, other themes, which again I don't know if they're written on here, or but like precious stones
Mm,
are Venus, and like ivory and
mm-hmm.
gold, and all of these things are rare and
Uh-huh.
hard to find, and so that's
And they're valued. Yeah.
valued, exactly. And so it's like all of those pieces kind of come together to make this idea of what
Venus is the
Venus is.
prize, wants
Yeah,
to be the prize,
yeah,
is looking to be prized.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
Um, yeah, but those, and it gets tricky, right? Because when we talk about Venus, it sounds so feminine, and actually, feminine's a fine word, right? But it does, like, we get more into,
Because Mars will feel more masculine, and
right,
it
but
is
then what
with.
is so, but just to like distinguish those things, um, and this will also kind of translate over when we start talking about like Greek translations and things like that.
Uh-huh.
But um, is like what we have to think about, like the frame of the culture at the
Right.
time, and always looking back. Obviously there's so many different studies of astrology, and everything's coming from somewhere else, but you can always kind of see, if you look at where it's
The
coming
link.
from, yeah, like the cultural context, like the frame that it's coming from. um and so, and I think we had talked about this earlier on in one of our episodes, but I think it's always a good reminder, especially when we get like heavy into like polarized themes, is like asking ourselves questions like how does this, how does the core of this archetype fit into today? Like, what does it mean to be a Venusian man and a
Mm-hmm.
Venusian woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the traits exist within all of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more traditionally um, feminine,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like remove the word feminine and put in like Venusian,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Venusian being like the word to prepare and get yourself ready no matter who you are,
Yeah.
and be able to go out in this pursuit of whatever it is, right?
Right.
Like intimacy. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. Um, moving from the significations, I think
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be going on to Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love and beauty, and often the, what is the word I'm looking for? Like the Venusian archetype,
Mm-hmm.
Greek archetype.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting to talk about her. I know that there's multiple Venusian archetypes in different, like Roman and Greek and different mythology. But I think that this is where it starts, like where people look at Venus and just see one thing, and then they see like the love, and they see the, sexual whatever sensuality, and they see beauty. But not that this is necessarily like so true for Venus as the planet in astrology, but I think it's interesting to think about, like, in certain cultures how Aphrodite was seen as the goddess of love and war. And although Mars is the god of war, it was looked at that way because they would see that love and war often like stem from the same desire. But it was more so based on like the relation to war and the context of victory, not necessarily the war itself, but to be victorious and be at the top and be highly valued and to have that sort of power in a way. Um, and the power of status and the power of getting what you want. And I think there's more of like a soft power
And Venus.
there influence rather than
Mm-hmm.
like a force brute, power. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting about Aphrodite in that like sense when you think about Venus.
Yeah. Also, two things are coming to mind, but one, like there are different archetypes for like Venus in different cultures and
Right,
stuff,
right.
and so kind of tying into like what we were just talking about, but um, like some of them are women, and then there are a few that are men.
Uh-huh.
And so you see like these different cultures have different interpretations of
Mm-hmm.
like what Venus looks like. So it's interesting to hear that in some, like you are hearing of Aphrodite of being the goddess of love and war, right? And then it's like, okay, so if Aphrodite is the goddess of love and war, brings in like my second thought of like, what does war look like to Venus? Like,
Yeah.
what is a Venusian sense of war? And it reminds me of kind of like what we were talking about with alliances and stuff. And you had mentioned that oftentimes um, with Venus, uh, okay, well, I think of Venus as justice, right? And so, but
Right.
I think you put like a good context to it is that, like, imagine,
Venus wanting to form allies in the sense of justice.
yes, but like to use a specific example, like what we were talking about before we started filming was this like, okay, someone does something to wrong someone who you are close to and have like partnership with. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be romantic, right? A
Mm-hmm.
friendship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially like when I think of like female friendships
Mm-hmm.
and stuff is like, okay, now I'm going to, like, we are going to form an alliance.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this mentality of like restoring the balance, but it's a
Yeah.
very Venusian way of doing that,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know?
and it's also like interesting too. And I mean, it's just is true. I think that I see this happen. And I think I can be like this sometimes that a lot of like those first instances, especially like in high school and early years, like when you're making new friends or something that you might like sort of um, come together on is knowing like, oh, she doesn't like her either. And
Mm-hmm.
it's that sort of like, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend thing. Like we this is what we're gonna start our bond over is the fact that and but it's there's also I think there can be more to it of like, okay, well if you don't like her, then I know that maybe you're not this way. I don't know if it's always
No, but I think that
super
that's good. And I think it also draws in like your Venus placement, right? Is like, okay, what does it look like? And with what nature do you go about forming an alliance, right?
yeah.
That's never, I've honestly, that's never been me. Maybe someone will watch this and think to themselves, you're a freaking liar because you've definitely done that with me before. To my recollection, I don't think I've always had a hard time unless someone actually did you wrong. But if I know my friends in the wrong and they're like, you know, F that be, it's
Hmm.
like, I have a hard time. I will 100% not side with another person, but I will look my friend in the face and be like, with love and care, that's wild, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
But I think that that's kind of, again, like a conversation we had previously with like the Sagittarius Venus, where it's like this alliance of, like, that's more of a mentality. It
Well,
draws
I
the
think it's more
Venus
so
theme.
I'm thinking more so in terms because I get what you're saying, but I'm thinking more so in terms of like if you have these certain values or ideas and you see like you don't agree with somebody else on them or you have conflict with them or you don't like them regardless of whatever it is whether it's valid or not
Then having
and
someone who agrees with you is
yeah
like that.
but it
Oh,
also
for sure.
not necessarily the agreements but also knowing like well if you don't like them then I feel like I can trust you because I don't like how they move like
Mm,
okay if you see somebody out in the world and there's somebody that you don't like and they don't like them either you can assign value to their character thinking okay well she's shady and if you don't like her then maybe you're not so shady
right.
it's
And the
that sort of
question of whether or not you're saying the truth is almost irrelevant.
exactly it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if
Okay.
you're like vindicated or it's
Yeah.
rational it's just the thought process behind like I'm going to make a maybe this is Mercury coming in I don't
Yeah.
know but making a sort of like assigning value to like what your what I how I see you socially like
Right,
and
right, right,
how
right.
if we can come together in that way based on
Interesting.
uh I don't know
Yeah.
the dislike
The
or
whole breakdown of that situation sounds like a few things at play for
right
sure, but
right
I like that Venusian, like forming the alliance and having like a common interest in some capacity. That
mhm
makes sense to me.
mhm
Um,
yeah and on that note on the Aphrodite thing like I think there was also just some other things I wanted to touch on which we already have with the indications significations but just how Venus can be so like watered down to love and beauty and what that means and be so pretty and be so nice and I think that that something we were also talking about before is that Venus is only like that half the time because when Venus feels wronged or senses unfairness, senses, you know, imbalance or feels misunderstood, there is that sort of like expectation of I can't get this word
reciprocity. They're
reciprocity and does not
going to find a way to restore the balance.
right
Yeah.
whatever that means
Yeah. Well, and this is where we're on the scale.
right
We're constantly on the scale, is like of how like how involved in like healing I am and things like that. So
Right.
and that and plus the themes of what that looks like will always kind of sink into maybe like the sign that our Venus is placed in.
Mm-hmm.
But we're always on that floating scale of like how much of this is aligned and how much of this is like completely in self. But the themes of Venus stay the same, right? It's just how do I express it that
Right.
changes.
Right.
Um,
And I think that even on the beauty aspect, while yeah, beauty can just be just as you see it, like how, you know, pretty does somebody look or how put together are the aesthetics. But I think like maybe it's just because I'm a Libra, but I think that like I feel a little bit like protective of the whole love and beauty thing because I think beauty can be a lot more
yeah,
than what it's like just boiled down to all the time. I feel like it's not always shallow, and there's
no,
value to it based on expression of yourself and expression of your taste or your
yeah,
style, your aesthetics. I think there can also be some sort of sense of like your self worth in that. Not beauty, obviously, is in the eye of the beholder, so it's not necessarily how beautiful others think you are, but how do you feel when you look at yourself in the mirror and you're feeling good about yourself and showing that you want to take care of yourself.
yeah. I also think when you're not taking care of yourself, like spiritually and mentally, then, like I know this is true for me, but it starts to take a
It
toll on me
reflects
physically.
totally.
Yeah. And you can always kind of see like the state of mind that I'm in by how I'm appearing outwardly.
Right.
Yeah. And not
Right.
just like, oh, I'm bumming it. That's neither here nor there, but like my physical
Yeah, your
state.
health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, I guess do
And
too paired with
yeah.
that.
Yeah. And
Um,
then there's like the social aspect that we kind of talked about before of like where do I fit in and like marketing yourself of based on your beauty or
yeah.
based on your aesthetics of like and that's almost that can be a tool for survival or a tool for, social, you know, interaction and fitting in and, having that
Yeah.
sort of harmony and balance, to for self-preservation in a way
For
too.
sure.
And
Well, that's where we fall into like the protective state of Venus, which can be like conceit and vanity and all of those things where it's like when I become too consumed with self, which usually stems out of fear, right? Then
mhm.
like I will still exhibit traits of Venus because Venus doesn't go away,
Mhm.
but it will start to take on like a different form.
Right, right.
And it will be harder for me to be in like the rejoiceful side of togetherness with people, but also like the rejoiceful part of like the ritual and all those things,
Mhm.
like enjoying it for the sake of, I don't know,
Nourishing
being
yourself
nourishing
or
yourself,
mhm.
yeah, and being a part of something. So yeah, and that's where it can be like some of our other significations here, but like going too far in what is bad, right? But then on the other side, it's like we have joy in everything, right?
Yep.
Um, so yeah, it's interesting how those things can all kind of work together.
Yeah. And then even on the note of um what was the last thing you just said about
Going too far in what is bad, joy in everything.
yeah, I feel like on the note of the personal politics, I saw that coming up when I
Yeah.
was, doing my Venus
Yeah.
dive and stuff and it makes you think about also if Venus is about relationships and about love and all that. We talked on the beauty things, but then there's also Venus having some sort of, you know, importance and value on your relationship with yourself
Yeah.
and your own self-worth
Yeah.
and how much are you giving in love and how much are you taking, and when there's that imbalance it shows in your relationship and it
Yeah.
shows in yourself
But to
and
me, yeah, and I love that because it's so much of what the sign is. For me, that's how that makes sense, right? Is that like,
when you put the sign into placement.
yeah, because it's personal politics. So it's like, okay, Venus can represent personal politics. Okay, now let's assign that to the chart. What do my personal politics look like? And that also feeds into this idea of like the placement of your um, the placement of Venus in your chart very much so symbolizes like what kind of person I will find beautiful. And that does not just have to be their appearance, right? Even though Venus also signifies like physical
Mhm.
form.
Mhm.
And because when we see people and we find them attractive or they have an attractive figure,
The
it's like,
initial,
ooh,
yeah.
that is a Venusian, uh, like, what would be the word? Um, like example, for
Yeah.
lack of a better word, but also like the Venusian draw
Mhm.
towards it. But there's beyond that, right? Is like the Venus placement in your chart is very much so deeper than that. Is like what qualities of like the soul do I find attractive,
Yeah.
and also how do I present myself when I'm in this like state of uh, like for romantic relationships, like courtship.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in general, right? Like you court
Friendship and
friendships
yep.
and all of those things. So, um, what does that look like? And I think that that's fun
Mm-hmm.
because, like, uh, okay, I was thinking earlier about we're talking about the readying of Venus, but what does it look like, or what has it looked like for me when I'm like readying myself for like some kind of courtship? That's such a funny word to use, but it's honestly working
The
well.
best word to use,
Yeah.
yeah.
But having my Venus in Cancer, I'm very much so like soft natured,
Uh-huh.
and I bring out. You've always said that about me too. You're like you act completely almost different because you don't get that side of me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is like one, we've been friends for so long, you wouldn't even remember if you ever got that side of me. But present day is like, or like as you've watched me through the years,
Mm-hmm.
is like, okay, this is the state that you fall into when like you are like have interest in someone or da 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 da. And I think that Spencer, my husband, would say the same thing about like when me and him, that was the nature that I took on, is very like soft, and I don't know what words I would really use to describe it, but like very Cancer-esque.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, it's a very, I would say this sounds, I don't know if this sounds like right to you, but it does feel like a divine feminine way. And now maybe in the
yeah,
past, there was times where it was not
gross.
necessarily so divine feminine and maybe a little bit more in like a like submissive, like not stepping into that power sort of thing. I don't know if that's the right way to
Yeah,
describe
it's
it,
so
but
hard because there's balance of so many other things in my chart, but of like being more like like straightforward and
yeah.
stuff. However, like depending on what side of the scale I'm functioning on, like I would say in the past I've had issues of being like overly submissive and like kind of becoming more of like, I don't know, like just a doormat almost,
Yeah.
and falling into that like cancer fear of just like I want to be loved and X, Y, and Z, and so I'm gonna appear this way, but now I have to keep up this act, and I'm not gonna speak my mind, and I don't feel like that is a truth for me anymore. Um, I do feel like today, which I would say is more of a healthier way, that will always be my readying process. Like I don't think that goes away with Venus, right? It's like that is always with Spencer, that was the case. Is
Mm-hmm.
like I I definitely took on like a softer nature. Now how that remains, I think, is how well like that placement is like nurtured, is how well that keeps up. But also as another like layer to that is we have so many different parts of our chart. So I've also got to explore all of those. But the
Mm-hmm.
first initial one that comes out in the
Mm-hmm.
readying of like wanting to be intimate with someone is that Cancer part of
Mm-hmm.
me.
And well, and I feel like if I could add, I think that, as a Leo, there probably has always been that sort of like self worth, or maybe at least appearing that way, the self worth and self love and the confidence. But I think that, there's been a lot of self love on your journey through that, and the way Venus and Cancer looked like prior to that, and the way it
Yeah.
looks like now. The softer feminine energy and that writing is still there, but I think that um I don't know, when you add like when that value comes from yourself too, then you're able to attract those that value you instead, and that's where that sort of like attraction
For
thing
sure.
comes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also I've also always been attracted to like emotional people, like
Mhm.
emotional men. It's like I like to see that you are soft and that you are empathetic and
Mhm.
understanding
And nurturing.
and nurturing and all of those things. So it goes both ways in that sense. Whereas like this has always been our biggest. Thankfully, we're friends and
Yeah.
not partners because like it just wouldn't work. Um, but and you could talk more about your Sagittarius Venus, which I know is like completely opposite of mine.
Yeah. Well, that was only one thing I was going to say about yours, and that's that even though I think naturally, as somebody who's like, we're almost like family in a sense, I'm not necessarily seeing you and your readying and
Yeah.
like attracting a relationship, friendship state. I think that there are times, and this is something that I do like appreciate. It's just not necessarily how our baseline function is,
Hmm.
but it's like that I get the
Hmm.
Cancerian Venusian energy from you, or the Cancer Venus energy
Yeah.
from you, when like I feel like I need that emotional nurturing, and
Yeah.
it like comes right in. You're able to tap into that, like, okay, we're not in like silly, goofy, haha,
Mhm.
or like just shitting around, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm that soft side is there and ready to, I don't know,
Like it is available at
to,
any
yeah,
point.
to
Yeah.
give in that
Yeah.
way. So yeah, but then on the flip side for me, I think the Sag Venus, I I feel like where you like to attract that sort of the capacity for like holding your emotions and being that sensitive side,
Also
and
that sense of like security.
yes,
That's I think a good way to contrast them.
the sense of security
Mhm.
and um the nurturing, like obviously all the things we're talking about, anybody can want those things of like, oh yeah, I want a secure relationship, or I want to feel nurtured, and that's can be like general blanket whatever, but because I can say that about myself
Yeah, of
too, but
course.
is it like my number one
It's the core
thing that
need.
I'm
Yeah.
looking for? Like, no, it probably is good to have, but I feel that sort of like boredom with
Yeah.
security, and not saying that's a good or bad thing, but it just is. And I have to learn how to combat that while also honoring my own desires for the like excitement. And I'm
Yeah.
looking at that's what my Sag Venus looks for, is like to feel excited and to want to have every, you know, day feel like a rom-com, and
Yeah.
to have the playfulness of the chase and the pull, push and
Yeah.
pull, and within that still feeling like it's solid, like, and that's the fun of it, is that we can do this, we can play and we can push and pull, and that like underneath that we're still there,
Yeah.
but it's like it's
Like that's the main priority.
the
Yeah.
initial, even like
That like
as
core
first
need.
as much as I like want the sensitivity and the nurturing, it almost like scares me at first, you know what I mean?
Mm.
I don't even feel fully comfortable with that, with it being the super sensitive nurturing type,
Yeah.
and I'm sure I need it, and I'm sure like it's healthy and good for the relationship, but it's not that immediate desire that I have.
It's funny because it's like flip flopped in a way of like Sagittarius energy is very like repelled by that at first. It's like whoa 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 whoa, like that's a
But they
lot
probably
right
really
now.
need it, yeah.
But then down the road, that's like it becomes like a core need. Whereas I
Yeah,
feel like with Cancer, they are like I need this right away, and then they
yeah,
get it, and then down the road they're like you gave me that really quick. Like this is
yeah,
questionable. You know what
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. Like I'm kind of like, what's next now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
Um,
I think there is like a big shift, and also thinking about like partners that you've had in the past and stuff. It's like you you've always had partners that give you like completely different experiences. But I
yeah.
would say that they all and all being very different. But I would also say that all of my partners have been very different. However, yours there is like a thread through yours as well, whereas like
Mhm.
it is this upbeat life of the party, like
Mhm.
very,
Mhm.
you know what I mean,
Mhm.
just like this sense of
There's a
freeness to
there's a lot
them.
of exploration in that, and I think everybody can find, learn a lot about themselves through their
Yeah.
relationships and through love and whatever. But I think that through my romantic relationships, like especially having that Sagittarius energy there, it's like I want to learn as much as I can
Yeah.
from this experience and about myself and about you. And I mean, I think about um my one of my exes, Jane, and she was a Sagittarius, and like I feel like prior to that relationship and after that relationship, was I felt like such a different person, but like so much I felt also so myself,
Mm,
because I feel like she showed and taught me so much that like I was looking for in a way, like just about life in general, like in
yeah.
music or in film or like through humor
Yeah.
or through social relationships. Like I that relationship really helped me like grow and learn about myself as a
Yeah.
person. And I don't, I mean, I think, I guess that is a normal experience for a lot of people, but they feel a lot more I don't know, like personal to the core
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah. Well, especially with Sagittarius being her sun sign,
Yeah,
it's like this like sense of being driven by that, and you're like here in love, like
yeah, like
oh,
I'm
I want to
seeing her
follow,
as
and I want
her
to,
sun
yeah.
sign with that, and I'm just like so like
Hmm.
gravitating towards
Yeah.
that energy that you're giving off,
Yeah.
so
I love that. Yeah, I think if you're looking at, and I know that this is what a lot of people relate, or I'll say reference, I'm sorry, Venus for, And a lot of the questions that I get is like, okay, can you tell me about my Venus sign so that I can know if I'm
Everybody wants to
compatible?
know about the Venus sign, yeah.
Yes, like I want to know if I'm compatible with this person. And of course, like if I'm looking at compatibility or something, I'm often going to the Venus sign, but it's not so black and white, you know?
Yeah,
Like sometimes having the same Venus sign isn't all it's cracked up to be. You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like everybody has different needs at different times, and there are so many other things at play. But I think what we've talked about tonight has really put this like wrap around how big Venus can be, right? Is
Mhm.
like Venus is not just about where it is, all of these things, but it's not just the beauty and the love and the desire. It all of those things get to be true together. It is also like, what does it look like for me to prepare for this? Like the ritual. I love a
Mhm.
ritual of getting there, you know, and then also the rejoicing in it, like you talked about like the expression,
Mhm.
you know, whether it's through like self or through art, but also like the expression of being in the moment. And that would be where like the rejoicing and the camaraderie, like Venus talks a lot about playing games together, you know, this sense of
And that's
play.
the building of the relationships.
Yeah.
That's is how they start, with a shared like laugh or a shared
Yeah.
moment and conversation. That's what we build every moment of a relationship on, is having those certain memories that, are stepping
Yes.
stones. And
Yeah. I feel
yeah.
like those are the ones that we like note and that stay as like core memories in our
Yeah.
head,
Yeah.
when we are allowed, when we allow ourselves to be like present in the experience,
Mhm.
in the readying,
Mhm.
in, you know, in that moment, and like allow it to be beautiful. I think that that is what Venus is. So the point of this episode, like all of the, not just this episode, but all of the ones, is to start like piecing it all together, you
Mhm.
know, and having a conversation about like, yes, what is this planet in itself, but also how do these planets work together? Um, so the next episode we'll do is Mars,
Mhm.
and that will give such a good contrast to Venus, which will be super fun.
Yeah.
Um, and we also both have our Venus and Mars
Conjunct.
placements conjunct, which means that they are in the exact same place. So like my Venus is in Cancer in the 12th house, and so is my Mars, and then yours being Sagittarius in the 8th house.
Yep.
So it'll be, maybe it wouldn't be as great if we did, because we could give two different perspectives. We will be able to because the signs are so different, but um, it's it's interesting
Getting
to
into
talk
the
about how they
Martian
work
energy,
together.
contrasting from the Venus energy, even though they're the same sign
Mm-hmm.
and same houses,
Just
like,
Just Mars as a planet alone,
yeah, separate from yeah.
yes, black and white, but they're always like working
Yeah, it's the yin
together.
and yang almost. And
Yeah.
that's kind of a good note too when we think about the masculine and feminine too, of like what that means. It's that it's just not necessarily like so gendered, but just that yin and yang of that's what I think about when I think about Mars
Yes.
and
Yeah,
Venus.
I
Yeah.
think that those are good words to put to it. So stay with us until our next episode. We'll talk about Mars. Um, but until then, thanks for watching.